Hello, everybody, and welcome to Catalyst Conundrum Episode 9. What is a complex adaptive system, and why is it so important to operationalizing a system? So, we've been around a long road. I'm going to reinforce this quote. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, aka be curious. Knowing for sure doesn't work. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So, with that, today's conundrum is brought to you by the word phenomenon. Phenomenon. Uh, get it now, hot off the presses. So, interestingly enough, it's yet another noun. So, how do we verbize these concepts that we have to deal with and turn into action? How do you take concepts and turn to action? That is the fundamental challenge here, and that's what we're going to wrestle with here today. But if you look at it, a phenomenon is two things: uh, a fact or situation that is observed to exist or happen, especially one whose cause or explanation is in question. A fact or situation that is observed to exist or happen, especially one whose cause and explanation is in question. For me, phenomenon are compelling because they're curious, they create curiosity. However, I've observed, here's a phenomenon, when presented with a phenomenon, most people want to smash it, don't want to deal with it. I know the answer, or let's just avoid it altogether, avoidance. And that's perplexing to me because every time humanity's confronted a phenomenon head on with curiosity, discipline, and the scientific method, we've advanced as a society. And when we don't, we create massive conflict and basically try to kill each other. One example, somebody made the observation that perhaps the sun doesn't revolve around the earth. When you said that, you'd be killed for it. I'm not kidding. That's easy to just sort of go, oh, that's dumb. But we do the same behaviors ourselves because the resistance of change is so high. Hopefully, we've learned that in ourselves. And then, geez, let's magnify it in business today. So, one of my heroes is this person. Who is this? This is in one of those obscure references. So, this is like Trivial Pursuit. Who is this man? This man is F.A. Hayek. And one of the things that he is known for is he wrote a book. Well, he wrote several books. He's known for a famous quote is the pretense of knowledge is a fatal conceit, which is definitely resonating with me because it's the same as Mark Twain's. It ain't what you don't know for sure that gets you in trouble. It ain't what you don't know that gets in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And I love people who walk that walk. Very, very, very few people walk that walk that have the intelligence and courage enough to admit what they don't know. Um, Einstein was one of those people. F.A. Hayek definitely was too. So let me tell you about what it was famous for, the body of work that he earned a Nobel Peace Prize, and then why is so heroic to me. So one of his claim to fame is this book called The Road to Serfdom. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend you read it because it couldn't be more applicable to what we're dealing with here today. Balancing of, do we focus on fixing individuals? No. Do we fix the system? How do you fix the system without alienating the individuals? And this is a human condition. It's not a business thing. You can't go in and get McKinsey to go look at it. You got to confront some real hard truths, and you have to embrace conflict. If we don't embrace conflict, we're not going to be able to solve this problem. It's really that simple. So basically, in his book, he talks about how there's this situation. Workers get upset. They come together and they want a utopia. then people come up and say, I have the solution for a utopia. I've got this rosy plan that farmers in rural areas are going to do this and industrial workers are going to do that, and blah, 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 blah. Now that's great because it unites the individual needs of many, many people. But then when it comes down to it, how are we going to get it done? And what happens is this quote unquote utopia, this great idea, this digital transformation is unworkable because ultimately people don't budge on their pet projects. And this is an example of phenomenon I experienced firsthand. I shared with you the conference board feedback about, hey, we all agree that we want to design sales enablement as a business within a business. Yet the people who say you got to start with process wouldn't budge, versus the people who said you got to start with technology wouldn't budge. The people who said you got to start with organizational, or say people, wouldn't budge. And the people who said you got to start with metrics, AKA information, wouldn't budge. So what happens then is that if there's enough angst around the plan, what happens is somebody says, let's make a central leader. Let's give somebody the authority to go do it. And that's when you get dictators. So at any rate, he did a lot of work around that. He's also one of the key supporters of this idea of the subjective theory of value, which is underpinning a lot of the work that we've got for the value equation. What's fascinating is he's considered the father of, or one of the fathers of the Austrian School of Economics, which is related to Chicago School of Economics, which several of you guys live in Chicago. So how about that as a serendipitous connection? But what is this a picture of? This is a picture of F.A.A. Hayek getting the Nobel Award for economics. So just think about this moment here. Pomp, this prestige, the honor. How would you react to this? Here's how Friedrich Hayek reacted. This is remarkable. He basically said in his acceptance speech, which is short, you can go Google it, I read it. It's written like a Austrian economic person. It's not as eloquent as, say, Kennedy would write. But this quote in particular is amazing. He basically said, I don't think that we should be giving Nobel Prizes for economics because economics basically isn't a science like physics. Think about this. Elected by your peers as the leading authority, saying we need to humble up, which he does say later, that we need a Hippocratic oath that stresses that we don't know everything. And yet here we are today where finance people act like we know everything because of numbers, and we're not challenging things enough. And then we've become enslaved because they have numbers to it. So here's his exact quote. In his objection of the award, it is that the Nobel Prize confers on an individual, an authority, think about that word, which in economics, no man ought to possess. So think about that. Where does authority actually come from? And then how do you design systems and processes in which to create authority that is based on reality, not some derivative viewpoint of reality? And that really is, sort of the big sweet spot problem of attacking a system, is you have to actually really, really understand a system. It is not just a construct. When we model too much about existing models, then we're paralyzed to it. One of the great things about the founding fathers is they looked at all forms of government and then they debated them. They published all of them. They created a grid. If you read about James Madison, he did most of the work on this, and he created scorecards, more or less, of all these different forms of government based on all the things that he read. In other words, he did most of the work to help people see what's happening. My job in this is to help you see what we're trying to accomplish. The sweet spot is an agreed upon a vision with enforced accountability. Now, what do I mean by that? In the collective it's all good intentions. I think we're all well intended. The people who participated in the Sales Enablement Society are well intended. But what happens is, with well intended without teeth, without accountability, specifically enforced accountability, nothing happens. So what happens is, when not enough happens, somebody wants action, but action without creating the will or the buy-in of the people creates disenfranchisement. So action without being thoughtful is the directive. It's too much control. So what's the sweet spot? It's easy for people to agree on things. It's hard to get people who've agreed to be accountable. So accountability is this big challenge, and accountability, authority, and power are words that people are incredibly uncomfortable talking about. Just as it's uncomfortable talking about your feelings, just as it's uncomfortable to talk about verbs or have the vocabulary to talk about action. And the whole process of making an experience come to life that's business savvy, that meets the needs of people, it becomes very difficult because we have all these things that we won't talk about. So it's basically either the collective, which is, oh, we're going to give in to political correctness or whatever. That doesn't work. And the directive, it doesn't work either. And I'll tell you, when we do our exercise for Conundrum 10 is going to be an exercise. I'm going to tell you flat out, when the collective gets frustrated, they actually want and assume you're going to be authoritative. When you're trying to direct the collective so that that doesn't happen, they treat you like you're trying to be a control freak. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. But the group dynamic is really driven by self-interest. That's why we have to have a written, agreed upon set of principles, which, by the way, this is why I work on principles. But here's something fascinating, and I want to really drive this point home. George Orwell, whom we all know wrote Animal Farm in 1984. If you haven't read 1984, you should, because that's the issue of power. You want to have a limited form of governance so that you activate people and people can live their lives and do what's best for the entity that they're participating in. But the thing is, people want to show control. People want to impose their will on top of other people. And I'm just fundamentally against that. And I fight that. So George Orwell said of Professor Hayek's thesis is that, hey, there's a lot of negative in it, but there's a lot of truth. There's negative issues about the human condition, our species, that we have to lean into. When we embrace the negative side of human nature, then we can unlock the positive. If you start with the positive, this idealism, and then try to impose it, what you get is oppression. So that's sort of a fundamental belief that we've got to sort out. Do we believe in the goodness of man, or do we believe that if we confront the negative human nature and put controls in place, that we've controlled that, then we're gonna unlock the unknown potential of human nature? So that's really what he's talking about. George Orwell is saying, look, at any rate, it is not being said nearly enough. And keep in mind, these guys are writing right after World War II. So after World War II, of course, there's a lot of discussion happening about dictatorism and authoritarianism, fascism, and all that stuff. We're not talking about that nearly. If they weren't talking about it nearly enough in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, when these ideas were published, then we're sure as hell not talking about it enough today. We're not said nearly enough. That collectivism. What is collectivism? It's the will of the people. It's democracy. We don't live in a democracy on purpose, because there's this tyranny of the masses that we should be very scared of. We should be scared of it ourselves. But on the contrary, gives to a tyrannical minority such powers that the Spanish Inquisition never dreamt of. Think about that. Okay, So this is why we have principles. Our principles, in order to achieve the objective that we've set out for and accomplish, this is our mission. This is the reason our country exists, or this is the mission that we've got. And I'm not really sure we've really pondered enough what being mission driven means, being outcome driven means, because outcome in upon itself is a noun. But let's review them. It's the experience stupid. How often are we're too, why are we sharing emotions? It's scary to lead with feelings, and then I don't know what to do and all that other stuff. So I'm just going to not do it. That's human nature, guys. We got to lean into and expect it. And that means we have to create processes that mitigate it. Lead with you. Quit talking about the collective. Talk about you individually and what your individual needs are, what your individual frustrations are. Be heroic. It takes courage. Trust the process. This is a process. It's messy. It's not nice, tidy, and neat. If you want nice, tidy, and neat, then you have to accept an authoritative control and be told what to do. I don't think you guys want to be told what to do. And I don't want you to tell you what to do. I want your creative potential by unlocking your unconscious competence. Get to yes quickly is really important. We are not embracing conflict. By not embracing conflict means we're not able to take advantage of the activation engine, which is built into our process. You got to be an orchestrator. There's a lot of things that you got to be accountable for yourself if you want to have the freedom to not be told what to do. It's just one of those things that the way it works. And it's about getting it right, not being right. Getting it right is part of the overall, what is in the good of all of us, the commonwealth. There's a difference between the commonwealth and collectivism. There's a difference between the commonwealth and socialism. There's a difference between the commonwealth and something else. That's what really inspired me about what a society actually really is. A society pushes itself to always strive to be better based on a few principles, but also a society looks out for its weakest. It's supportive. It's helpful. These are all things that we want to aspire to, and aspiring to those good things means we have to confront human nature, which means at any one point in time, you're likely to show up and say, this is too hard, I'm not going to do it, or whatever. That's human nature. We have to address it. So those are the principles. And the reason I'm bringing this up is what's scary to me about today is this phenomenon, Dunning-Kruger. We've talked about it before, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, anybody can access anything on the internet and be a quote unquote expert. We can Google search and say, I'm an expert on design thinking, even though I've never done it before. I Googled it and you're not doing it the right way. I mean, that is common. Or, I can Google it and say, this is the way you should be doing a value equation. I can Google it and say, but what you're doing is you're basically getting the feedback from others and not really challenging it. So we just have to make sure that we check this, because what works, and what works is observable. It's not observable to just take something on the internet and think that you got to know it. Knowing it and doing it are radically different things. So the other thing too is that's another reason why is I'd like to see a lot more of actions over here on the green side, just doing things on the green side. When you're over here on this side, I got to have facts. If you notice, I use facts to support a story and be creative. This is the side of what I want. This is the human being side. I don't want the work side, because the work side is going to show up like this. Dunning-Kruger bullshit. I don't want Dunning-Kruger bullshit. I can get enough of that. I can Google it myself for free. I don't need you. What I need the human side. I need the human of Brian. I need the human of Phil, and say, seems to me this curious phenomenon that we're running into, here's how I'm seeing it. And that we piece it together like human beings do for the good of everyone. Okay. So that's why we have these. What makes it really challenging then is VUCA is frying our brains individually as humans. They're frying our brains as societies. But the good news is we're waking up to be curious, and we have this pocket of curiosity, or this opportunity to create clear observations of existing phenomenon. And the better we're at it, articulating that phenomenon, the better off we're going to be. And we have tools to help do that, tools to help create that clarity. We have the all the work around the value equation to help clarify the messaging. We can be using that ourselves. What is the impact? What is the cost? What is the risk of somebody adopting my idea? You have to get in the mindset of people adopting your idea, not just putting it out there and being glorified by your work. Embrace the humility of a Nobel Prize winner, F.A. Hayek. Don't try to look for the accolades and try to get the Nobel Prize, because who gives a shit? It's just a Nobel Peace Prize. A Nobel Prize in upon itself doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything with the economy or any of that other stuff. So, this credentialism of people who win awards is silly. I want to see the credentialism of the people who've accomplished things. And where does that exist? So this is the economic theory of value. We've talked about psychology, both our individual psychology and emotions, and sociology, how we don't want to dwell in psychology because it's paralyzing, because it causes people too much inward reflection. But we need to have inward reflection if we're going to be a thriving team, because we have to be able to design a system that confronts human nature. We've talked about the whole idea that you learn by doing. And if you think that you're going to go take a course somewhere and learn something, well, it doesn't exist because the material doesn't exist. It's got to start somewhere. And that means we got to learn how to design a course. And design a course means we have to learn how to engage with the material that we're providing. We talked about the communication theory, like how does communications actually really happen? And why we have message messenger audiences is distillate. We talked about systems thinking a little bit, like how to optimize. We're going to get into that later. What we're going to talk about here is complex adaptive systems. What is the common glue that ties all this together? How are we connecting the dots between economic theory and what F.A. Hayek is talking about and George Orwell? What does that have to do with anything? And a complex adaptive system. So this is what we're zooming in on, is how do we make sure everything fits together? Everything must fit together or it's not orchestrated. We agree orchestration is a challenge, right? So what's behind orchestration? What's complex adaptive systems? How do we design a system for that? Complex adaptive systems provides the answer. So we're going to zoom in solely on that. Now, what I want to do is I want to frame this out. So part of what I'm going to do is, instead of just jumping to the answer, complex adaptive systems, I want to help you see why this is so important. What I'm going to do is share with you some evidence. This is some evidence. So yes, I'm going into your red brain and I'm going to provide some facts so that you accept what I'm saying. Because with all due respect, I do not believe you have been accepting what I've been saying for the past 3 months. It's about acting. It's about experience. It's about a system. We have to fail forward fast. You got to learn by doing, all of those other things. So what's behind all this? I recognize it's hard. I know it's hard to hear, but I need to have you pay attention and hear what I'm about to say, because our actions and behaviors don't match to what we said. A simple point is, and this is again, don't take this personally. This is human nature. And if we can confront it ourselves, we can help other clients see it and make that case moving forward. And the reason that I'm going back 9 years ago is because I'm going to show you the same patterns happen, whether they're in audiences or small individual teams. There's a common phenomenon that occurs. So in 2011, I gave the first sales enablement conference keynote presentation. The topics were outcome selling, and I introduced the new 4Ps. I got a 92% score. What the scores is doesn't matter. Just know that every time, everything that you did at Forrester when I was working there was measured, and you had to talk about it. Particularly keynote presentations, because George Colony was really competitive, and liked to compare keynote presentations. In 2011, my keynote presentation had a score 92, and it was the highest in the entire company. Whoop-de-effing-do, right? Because what I've listed out here were the three largest transactions that the sales enablement research group did. 50K, 50K, 50K. Lots of inquiries. Tell us about this, tell us about that, blah, 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 blah. Really awesome. New 4Ps, very cool thinking, blah, 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 blah. Outcome selling, yada, yada. Okay. Now, the reason, by the way, I hope you can tell I'm a very intentional person, and I've only gotten increasingly more intentional as I've learned more of these things. And so every time I did a keynote, it was meant to be the research agenda of my team. So we go to 2012 and introduce two concepts there. The hero concept, that sales enablement is holistic, engineered, reality-based, and ongoing operations. Note, we're not confronting the reality enough. Brian, how do we lean in and be more curious about that and accept the challenge instead of taking it as a criticism? It's an observation. Why are we taking it so effing personally? Bizarre, but this is why I'm providing more of the data. In 2012, my score was 88%. I took a much purposely backseat and presented some tough content without any real prescription. And here's what's interesting. So we had, a measurable, maybe between 50 and 100% increase in our largest deals. I can cite, if you want to know what these deals were and what they were, I can cite them. I don't think that's the point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how we introduced complex adaptive systems in 2013. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk here and look at this score. And what I want you to do is be curious. Think about this as a math problem. What would be the score be? What are the topics and what are the themes? And then what were the results in terms of big deals? So I want you to ponder this because you have to learn how the community or the world responds to information, not just yourself. And this has been one of the challenges that we're not creating an environment where we're sharing the perspectives of multiple people or asking me enough how varied the responses are, because this matters dramatically. Now, whether you believe that or not, hopefully I'll make that case. So here's the contents. If you'd like, I can go back and record what the keynote presentation was. But what I want you to do is I want you to listen to this. First of all, note the date, 2013. This is 7 years ago. I will repeat, 7 years ago. And what I'm going to comment on are messages that haven't landed because I'm not getting the help or learned how to ask for the help to make this stuff land, because we're not talking about it as a group. So basically, I see the reactions of the group, and very few people have asked me questions about how the group responds. I will highlight the tiny, tiny percentage of people who've asked and who they are. Okay, so having said that, bending the productivity curve to accelerate revenue. I think what you probably want to do is you're going to process is, do you understand it? And that you think you have to understand it first before you can do it out. But that's linear thinking, guys. What we have to do is understand what about this message do different groups see? That's what among messages. We've been too narrow and suffocating for it. Okay, March 4th, 2013. Here's some setup slides. Hopefully these resonate with you. I talked about what the definition of revenue is from SES, SES, SEC, the sales, or this is the Securities Exchange Commission. This is their definition of revenue. Why did I lead with that? Because I didn't want us to, we can't focus just on revenue. We got to focus on something different. We have to be curious. What is the purpose as a Salesforce? I said to communicate with your customers. And I gave a history of what's behind communications. I'm doing this to frame it. What's happened is some people who understand this zoom way into the weeds rather than why are we communicating it? It's trying to unlock information across the board. So to do that, boom, I'm relating it to something different. I'm relating that the value communications process is just making this light bulb go off. And there's a current, a red and a black, because this is what makes it work. And I know this is blue, but I couldn't find a better graphic. And it's really, really hard to explain to creative people what you're looking for until after you've done it. And then they're like, oh, why don't you just tell me? And it's like, I tried. But they want to replace it with what they know, not what you're trying to convey. So this is what makes communicating this stuff so hard. But then you can say, look, messenger, audience. We want interactions between the messenger and the audience to make the light bulb go off, and we have to have content to make that light bulb go off. It's just that simple. So then we introduced, hopefully you can recognize this, ROI of sales and of growth spend. Interesting. This is a precursor to the commercial ratio. We've had this for years. But basically what I did is it broke down the income statement for BMC. It said, look, what I'm doing is framing out how much money and what the impact is of this particular system. Later on, I say, look, here's a system. How come when we go out and create plans to grow? That's why you were assigned. How would you grow? What assumptions are you using to grow? How do you know for sure? Have you driven growth before? And if you have, then how do you articulate what actions happened? What actions actually made it happen or not? Maybe you're overthinking, or maybe you're biased too much. If you haven't, maybe you're just using the Dunning-Kruger effect and expecting activity to produce results. Activity doesn't drive results. Results, smart activity, smart actions that create activity that creates action does, not activity for activity's sake. To measure activity versus action is paramount, is a fundamental flaw in thinking. And unless we have a conversation about what actually makes action, then we're not going to get anywhere. So we introduced this concept, said, look, what we're trying to do, by the way, is reinforce, you know, these things because this is nature. This electric current is nature. The electric current is the value communications process. This is electricity. It is what it is. You know the phenomenon of trying to drive change or get something heavy to take off because you sit in them all the time. When you go and fly from New York to Los Angeles, you are experiencing a fundamental miracle, the miracle of flight. And what did they have to do to figure out how to fly? They had to figure out what are the forces of physics that we have to manage. In other words, yes, that's right. There had to be work to see what's happening in order to make it work. So we use this model as the way to make it work. The way to make this plane take off is you have to create lift because you have to overcome the weight. You have to create thrust in order to overcome the drag. So these are green forces to counterbalance these forces. Simple. But it's not simple, is it? Right? So what we did is we paralleled this and said, look, what we have to do is to recognize what's the failure to launch. Why do we have such poor new product and solution launches? How come new demand generation campaigns fail? How come training programs for the sales force fail? How come implementation of new sales models or adoption of new technologies doesn't work? Why? Because none of them do. The failure rates across all the boards is super, super high. What makes us think we're going to roll out something different too? And this is why it's so incredibly important that we have hyper massive discipline and delineating the difference between pilot, limited production run, and scale, just like manufacturing does. I mean, it's so obvious when you take a step back. So what is the drag? Organizational drag. It's the resistance. I hope all of us have experienced that ourselves. We ourselves individually creating drag to do something different. And then there's the weight of the comfort zone. I'm not going to do it. This is sort of the emotional part. So organizational drag is also, well, that's my department. That's what I'm supposed to do, blah, blah, blah. So as you can see, we're giving an identity to phenomenon that explain why this thing isn't working, so that when you go do these things, you tackle them differently. So what we highlight is saying that this system that you're in, this value communication system, it's a complex problem. And I hope you recognize that these are criteria. We have to define criteria because we have to help people see it. This right here is just a simple thing to create the space to let somebody hear this. You can't just lead with this. You can't, because people shut down because it's too overwhelming. But unless you create some curiosity behind it, I never thought of it that way. So you have to have this set up in order to do this, in order to do other things downstream. So it's a complex problem. What is a complex problem? Your value communication system behaves like it's alive. So executives feel beholden to it. An example, see, criteria, challenge. Now I'm going to give an example. Criteria, challenge, example. Criteria, challenge, example. If we're not doing those things, you're not helping people see your work either. And then introducing all the new ideas that each of you have, which each of you do have new ideas, are going to be just met with resistance. It's just, this is the pattern. We have to find a new approach. There's a science to this, but a system behaves like it's alive. You can't really control it then, can you? Executives feel beholden to it. Example, how many executives do you know or have you heard of that, well, we can't do that because our sales force, which is an asinine thing to say logically. Isn't that an emotional answer? Many, many, many interacting roles. The number of nodes are unknowable. So for example, how many different people touch an individual contract? Think about what's happening at IQVIA. How many people are involved? The system is affected by memory or feedback. So what happens is you project your past bias to new approaches. It's the same phenomenon that you have as a human being about, that whole idea of, that's not going to work because that didn't work before. Well, you have that same muscle memory collectively in the organization. That won't work here. So immediately you're sort of locked into some sort of control part. If you can relate to that to yourself, then you can relate to it of how an entity operates. Why is that the case? Because this is an entity based of human beings. Adapt their own strategy. Individual people within the system or individual groups just go off and do their own things in an uncoordinated way. This is the lack of orchestration or random access sales support. An example would be, boom, we're going to go and do this training program. So literally, as we're trying to build a new model, Jen's dealing with 2 random acts of quote unquote support that have gone up to the executives. These are realities we have to help manage so that we can help our clients land their plane. If we're not aware or tune those things out, we're not participating in the ecosystem. And if we're not participating in the ecosystem, we are not doing a go-to-customer strategy. And if we're not doing a go-to-customer strategy, everything that we're doing, we're lying. We're not being honest. We are inauthentic. And these are knowable things. So adapt their own strategy. Exposed to external influences. limited control of internal messaging. So whatever, here's an example. Guys, here's what we're going to do. Google search, this is what design thinking is. I know for sure. Or instead of doing the exercises I provide, I'm going to go do the exercises I learn elsewhere. Or instead of doing this thing, I'm going to do what I know for sure because I can control it. And then say, your exercise, your approach doesn't work. This is also common. You've got exposure to external influences. So you can't really put a box around a complex problem. Then what I did is I introduced this so I kept reinforcing this concept of simple. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So then we say, let's address the elephant in the room. This is your company. This is your company here. Really, really comfortable of holding on to your current state. Your business strategy calls for you to be over here. Your selling system is here. The current selling system cannot support the weight of your business requirements, and it's holding your organization back from meeting its objectives. How do we help make that concrete? This makes sense, but where's the tangible so that people can feel more comfortable, so that this elephant can take baby steps along the way? How do we fill in these planks? This is the material that I need from you guys. Just fill in a plank before or even just after, because other people can follow that even further. So if we just get from here and create a series of slides that are this plank, guess what? That allows other people who've been through that we haven't been through, make those steps easier. And then if we're in here, make a plank here, and so on and so forth. What happens is we get to here, and then, the thing implodes. This is the slope of disillusionment, because there aren't planks. You can be laying the planks here. This is exactly how the Amish build farms. That's how they do barn raising. And no one argues about this or says, I don't know how to do it, so I'm not going to do anything. It doesn't happen because the barn's got to get built. People just say, I got a hammer. I know how to hammer. Let's just hammer this up. It happens. That is human nature also. So if we just trust that process and understand and become aware that's what the process is the always perpetually be doing, then we get out of our thinking hell and we actually get to be more human, and it's fun. Here's another thing that was introduced. Hopefully you can see some relationships here. From what to what? Go to market, go to customer. I've changed this part here. So over 7 years, so what's worked and what's changed? Those would be questions to ask. If you want to help me, I make observations from the past and then now and fill in the gaps. That's perpetual learning. Just trying to understand things in the point in time isn't understanding things in motion. So we have to learn how to also look at time in a very different way. Look at this. Not all clients are the same. You can plot clients out in different parts. So then here's another little riff. So the question, and this is a question, so notice how I frame questions. And I even put this in keynote presentation. How do we migrate groups of customers? Why didn't I call them segments? From their current relationship level, so we have to define this more concretely with us, to our desired end state, while also performing each quarter. This one question created the growth strategies. And you saw how quickly that took off. This is the power of framing one question and having discipline to keep answering it and being curious. Trying to do things one off don't work. It's doing the work to get things down to one question. And then here's a hypothesis statement. We must develop a selling system that is designed to accelerate the business strategy, adaptive to changing market forces, and flexible enough to optimize resource allocation based on the current reality of any given customer's desired relationship rhythm with our business. Now, again, that's 7 years ago. I'm going to take some credit here. It's pretty awesome. because look how timeless this is. Now we could tweak some of these things, but this is timeless. Timeless work like this that you can build from over and over and over and over and over again comes from the discipline of getting your thinking and getting these kinds of questions and doing the work in between. Just doing stuff for doing stuff's sake doesn't work. Nature is pleased with simplicity and and nature is no dummy. So I did that, as a pause to introduce the response rhythms. Now this is way too much information to compress. So what I have to do is I need to learn how to chunk it, and I need help to learn how to chunk and what to chunk and how to make the stuff more available. But hopefully you can see here's the beginning point of a relationship rhythm. How easy is it? A relationship rhythm is a box this defined by this boundary. It's measured by these things, tuned to what you need to have criteria here. This is part of the reason that we're struggling, is that we have to help our clients see the ambiguity of what a customer type is, what a buyer type is. They're defining them so specifically and in the weeds and not abstracted up. And then how do you create the construct to make somebody more comfortable with what an abstraction is? And then scaled by what? What's the strategy? Boom, boom, boom. That's very simple. And I tried to make this look like sheet music so it would feel natural. So this is the quote that I ended the keynote with. Hopefully this is familiar, and hopefully you can see why I'm a broken record about certain things. That's been one of my mantras: focus and simplicity. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple, but it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move mountains. So what do you think the scores were? Remember how I set this up? 92, 88. What was the scores of this message? So I introduced systems and relationship thinking, and I took a hit on my scores. So that was really baffling. The interesting thing is, over here, where I had a line of people who wanted to talk to me that were all manager level or marketers, over here, I didn't have a line. But the people who were really curious to talk to me, what do you think their altitude level was? There were VPs of chief revenue officers, CMOs, and COOs in big companies. What were the average deal sizes? Look at the difference. The point is, how you look at something matters tremendously. When you zoom in and try to solve the root cause problem, you're not going to be accessible to the masses. What we need to do is learn how to become more aware of what the executives want, the quote unquote leader. And if you're leading a team that's even more, that's kind of very focused on one thing, you're probably not going to see this. It's the leadership of bringing multiple departments and multiple perspectives together. And the only people who are these folks? 400K, boom, HP. 600K, boom, Hayworth. 250K, boom, CSC. Who did I engage with? Hayworth or HP was a group of marketers that had sponsorship of the CMO. Hayworth was the CMO, CEO, and chief sales officer. 250K, the chief commercial officer at CSC. Boom, boom, boom. All of these things add up to more of all of these things combined, and it's fewer. The issue, though, is the work required to be really focused and organized and make the message relatable to other people is off the charts challenging. I need help to make it relatable. We don't need new ideas. We need muscle layering out off of the core constructs that we've got. Hopefully I've proven to you that in 2013, it's a lot of the same nucleus that we've made better today. So let's talk about this. What's actually behind this? I would want, Scott, what does it mean? Would you redo it? Is this exact? Do we scale it out? Here's what you should be asking me. You should be asking me, where does this come from? How do I understand it more? How can I help you flesh it out? Like, are you comfortable with this? My answer is no, I'm not comfortable with this. I need to make this more accessible. And I think each one of these things need their own setup. And then we have to create a setup that's compressed enough so that people don't time out. So there's a whole storyboarding that goes on with introducing these ideas. Hopefully you've noticed that, oh, you got to experience it some, like there's a life cycle to this. We need to be mapping out what that life cycle is. It's the journey. In other words, it's the experience stupid. How do we interact with it? How do you personally interact with it? Are you aware how other people react to it? How is this possible? How is this possible? So what I'm going to do is we're going to watch this video together and break down complex adaptive systems. And I know this is running long. Maybe you watch this in 2 parts, but I'm kind of on a riff right now. And I think this is important information to share before we unpack the SES one. I wanted you guys to experience your own interpretation of how you would try to grow, because everybody wants to grow and they don't have growth strategies. Now we got to compare and contrast it to say, look, here's a body of work. How come in the work that you did, we didn't apply it? What do we need to do to make this body of work that we've got more applicable? Once we make it more applicable, we are all rich. Rich. Rich, rich, rich. So let's break this down. Watch it together. So by the way, complex adaptive systems, you can Google it. It's actually a new field of science. It emerged from network science, which actually is related to the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. No shit. It's a real thing.
In this module, we will be giving an overview to complex adaptive systems.
Already on board. So this is the issue, right? Is step number 1, somebody's got to do the boring work to document what it is, and then actually produce something like this that you're bored with. And then next step is, how do we make it accessible? I need help to just get it down into a format like this. Can somebody just interview me and help me organize the thoughts so we can create something boring first before we make it compelling? I can't do that with clients. They need something compelling and activating right now. So if you want to, the help that I need is to get this down into a concrete type of learning module like this, and know full well people don't learn this way. They learn by applying it. So we'd have to go back and redo all of this work. So what I'm saying is, it's tough, but it's sort of like just like a rocket launch. You got to discard one of the boosters. But this is what we need to do, because what's great about this, I hope that you can summarize what's the one word. The one word is, how do I see what a complex adaptive system is? The amount of skill that's in this to help you see is great. The amount of skill to make it relatable to you is poor. So that's sort of the challenge when you, anyway, I've said enough. So let's walk through this together.
We will firstly define what we mean by this term, before briefly covering the main topics in this area as we talk about adaptation, the dynamics of cooperation and competition, self-organization, and emergence. Finally, we will look at the complex
Remember the word emergence that brought up earlier?
Interplay between the micro and macro patterns of organization that is a core feature to these systems. A complex adaptive system is a special class of complex system that has the capacity for adaptation. Thus, like all complex systems, they consist of many elements, what are called agents. With these agents interacting in a nonlinear fashion, creating a network of connections within which agents are acting and reacting to each other's behavior.
So do you understand that? Probably not. It's a lot of words to break it down without calling it out. But if you do, awesome. It took me a long time to process this.
Adaptation, agents have the capacity to synchronize their states or activities with other agents locally.
The heck does that mean, synchronize their activity?
Out of these local interactions, the system can self-organize with the emergence of globally coherent patterns of organization.
What does self-organize and emergence mean?
Developing. This macro-scale organization then feeds back to the micro level, as the system has to perform
Macro scale, micro scale organization.
selection upon the agents based upon their contribution to the whole system's functioning. And thus there develops a complex dynamic between the bottom-up motives of the individual agents
Motives, bottom-up motives of the individual agents.
and the top-down macro-scale system of organization, both of which are often driven by different agendas but are ultimately interdependent. It is this
Think about that. People, the system is driven by people with interdependent agents. Now, the reason I want us to do this is I want us to make sure that when we go back and cross-check and build this for the value communication system, we cross-check each screen, each point, when we adapt it to our model to make sure it is compliant with the scientific evidence and observation. Because when we're divorced from science, then we're just pontificating.
This interaction between bottom-up differentiation of agents with different agendas going in different directions and top-down integration in order to maintain the global pattern of organization that creates the core dynamic of complexity within these systems. This is a lot of very dense information, so we will now try to flesh it out in greater detail through examples. There are many examples of complex adaptive systems, from ant colonies to financial markets, to the human immune system, to democracies and all types of ecosystems. But we will start on the micro level by talking about the agents and adaptation. An agent is an actor that has the capacity to adapt their state, meaning that given some change within their environment, they can, in response, adjust their own state.
That's heavy, huh? What does this mean? So look, they're picking words very carefully. Let's talk about the meaning so that you can take action against it. Look how noun driven this is. So heavy, right? An agent's you. On our team, you're an agent. You have the ability to change with your environment, or you can choose to be static. You have the ability to get over your fears, or you have the ability to surrender your fears. These are all choices. And those choices, some of those choices you're not really going to be aware of because you're an agent, you're a member, you are a entity in nature. So an ant does things through instinct. You do things through instinct. You have the capacity, however, to change your environment, to make some change that impact your environment.
So, say our agent is a player within a sports game. Well, if we throw a ball to the person, he or she can catch that ball. They are able to do this because they have what is called a regulatory or control system. A control system of this kind consists of a sensor, controller, and an actuator.
See, to me, this is too much detail, right? It's descriptive, but it's not. It's going to force more thinking instead of, okay, I got it. I'm an agent. I control my own behavior. Okay, so that's interesting. What does that have to do with anything else?
The person is using their optical sense to input information to their brain, the controller, that is then sending out a response to their muscles, the actuator. And through this process, they can adjust to generate the appropriate response to this change in their environment. And it is the same process through which a bird in an ecosystem or a trader within a market is receiving information, processing it, and
Information. How much information around the world are we seeing? So there's that word information. So agents respond to information. So maybe how would we diagram this a little bit differently, but stay within this chunk so that we don't blow up the overall architecture. That is, to me, the epitome of discipline, is to take a frame that somebody has put together end to end. We need to understand the frame end to end, so then we can go and tweak it. What's happening is people just take one thing that they understand, agent, and go off and run with it. That's the nature of business, but that's not how business works. When you design a system that factors in all of those different things end to end and watch how it actually works, then you can make changes. It's how things work is the key, not how they should be or what you think they are, because it's not possible that how you think they are is going to be the reality. So let's not design systems that are that heavy.
and generating a response. Typically, these agents can only intercept and process a limited amount of local information. Like a snail following a trail on the ground, it does not have a global vision of the whole terrain around it.
See, holistic. So that's the role of the orchestrator, is to think holistic, not just the slug trail, and recognize that people within the system who are just behaving, they're going to work on their slug trail. So our job is to figure out what the slug trails are and how people are going to behave in that, not tell them what to do and expect anything different, because they're not going to.
And it must simply respond to the local information available to it. With this capacity of adaptation, agents have some degree of autonomy through which they can choose to sync.
So this idea of synchronization six with the whole idea of rhythm. Look at how, if we have a cadence, we get into a rhythm. This is why discipline is so important. You establish a rhythm. When we choose to not follow the cadence, we're not creating a rhythm. When we work in a rhythm, things become easier. When we only choose to see chaos or don't do things in the rhythm, we don't create synchronization, which retards emergent behavior.
Synchronize or desynchronize their state with that of other agents within their local environment. We might also call this cooperation or competition. They typically do this based upon the costs and payoffs for choosing one of either option.
The cost of working with somebody versus the benefit of working with somebody. Are you in service of somebody? It's back and forth. I want to make it easy for people to interoperate with me. I want people to make it easy to interoperate, to want to be interoperating with me. I want people to work with people who accept that we're an emergent system, and that in order to go fast, we have to accept that. People who burden me with tons and tons and tons and tons and requests and manuals and things like that, because I need that stuff to go do, it's not valuable for me. So I will seek other agents to go work with. And I do that all the time because that's human nature. I'm a human being. You do that too. People avoid me. I know when I'm being avoided. I know which of you are avoiding me. I'm not dumb. I'm not calling it out either. It's your choice, and it's whatever it is to get things done. The only time we're gonna have a problem is not getting things done.
And this cost-benefit ratio varies depending on the scenario, or what we might call the game they are engaged in with other agents. Some scenarios, such as playing chess, have very low incentives for cooperation while favoring competition. These are called zero-sum games, while other scenarios have a much lower cost and a higher payoff for cooperation, such as driving your car on the correct side of the road.
So the idea is we have to create situations and make sure we're clear what the situation is. That situation, I try to encourage lots of cooperation. What's interesting is maybe I haven't created the mechanisms to create that learned synchronization. It's relatively easy for me to synchronize one-on-one, but when we start synchronizing as a group, there's just too much resistance to it. It's an interesting phenomenon.
These different types of games create attractors that result in.
What works is when you design a game. The difficulty for me is it's easy for me to design a game for the clients. It's hard for me to design games for ourselves, especially so I can do that earlier on. But as the stakes get higher and people opt out of thinking like it's a game or trying to pretend it's fun and opt into, oh my God, I feel a ton of pressure because my work brain's kicking in. Well, that's what creates paralysis. So this is why I brought up the red brain versus green brain stuff. There's science to this, guys. I think it would be helpful if you just ask, why do you do this? Instead of, because what happens with human nature is if you don't know why you do something, you accept it. Oh, that sounds great because the logic when the request is made, but then you blow it off because you don't know why. There's a reason why. I'm a very intentional person. There's science behind everything. Challenge me on the science. And then I'll tell you what I don't know because I believe in the Hayek stuff. Just state what you don't know. Science will reveal it. If it's not observable, then if we can't simulate the conditions, then we discard whatever the science is.
Default positions for agents.
All this, to me, good science is just observation. It's a declaration of observation. I don't think science is prediction, because prediction is, you might as well be, that's a religion to me. And I believe in religion over math on the future, because religion is based on humanity, the human condition. And I will always bet on the human condition versus numbers, which are derived by humans to predict the future. They just don't work. Credit default swaps. They knew for sure, right? That's why I'm anti AI. I'm highly suspicious of it. I don't think that there's enough evidence to prove to me convincingly that they can factor in these complex relationships.
To cooperate or compete. Added to this are feedback loops, where what one agent does influences what another agent chooses to do.
That's so true. How one person chooses to react to something sets the tone for everybody else. If somebody on the team freaks out in front of people, guess what? Everybody else around them responds to that strong emotion. That's why managing the emotions of a team is of paramount importance. That's why in Act 2, producing slides is of paramount importance, because we have to control the actions of others. Being paralyzed and not producing and not know why you're producing is the worst thing that you can do, because what you're doing is you're participating in the negative feedback loop. You're embracing the negative cycle rather than embracing the curiosity, which is the propulsion engine of growth.
If you owned a certain stock, and upon hearing some negative news about that company, all of your fellow traders around you started selling it, this would create a positive feedback loop, attracting you to also sell.
So if you don't believe emotions are of paramount importance, then I invite you to read about Keynesian economics, which is the default. If you think about bears and bulls, and you've heard about that on Wall Street, and people talk about that like it's certainty, go Google search. And I'm going to ask you to Google search where bears and bulls mean. They talk about the mood of the economy. I mean, come on, like, what is this? Ancient Egypt or ancient Greece, where we're are surrounded in a cauldron and throwing newt of this and newt of that. The fact is, the economy is a huge, natural, complex, adaptive system. No one person can predict it. So, we have to just separate ourselves with the certainty of the bulls and the bears. It's bullshit.
And if you did that, would again amplify the positive feedback, placing a stronger attraction on others to also do likewise. In such a fashion, some phenomena can cascade through a population, synchronizing their states rapidly.
See that in some cases that phenomenon can cascade through. That's like a virus. Moods are virus. Managing the emotional attitude and the energy created by constantly producing things with curiosity and leaning in instead of defensiveness creates the ability to synchronize that. When we lead by projecting either anxiety or depression or whatever, guess what? You get that. And the frustration that I'm trying to convey is a frustration on myself and a plea I don't know how many more ways I can ask for help of unpacking this stuff. Um, so what I'm trying to do is provide a mix of evidence. Here's the evidence of things that I've been through, specific examples, and just and also a mix of a plea. Here are some events. Can we tackle these events? Can we get over ourselves? I get over myself all the time. Um, I'm just asking you guys to do the too. It's a plea.
This process previously described is a form of what is called self-organization. From the interaction of the individual agents arises some kind of global pattern which typically could not have been predicted from the behavior of the agents in isolation.
Okay. Each one of these things we're going to need to parse out so that we make sure we understand the meaning of it. What does this mean?
For example, in the brain, consciousness is an emergent phenomenon, which comes from the interaction between the brain cells. Thus, the global property of consciousness results from the aggregate behavior of individual elements. Within this macro-scale system that emerges, control and regulation is typically distributed out. There is no master neuron or set of neurons that tell the whole brain what to do. No one is in control, and no one in the system has complete information of it. This distributed nature to complex adaptive systems may make them very.
No one is in control. I can only do what I can do. I need help. No one in the system has complete information. Stop trying. It's like we have to help people realize they can't understand everything. And if you try to understand everything, it's analysis by paralysis. How do we create boxes around things? The idea of giving you a sandbox with a different title is so that you can be in your green side of your brain and just constantly playing games with the information constantly. I'm curious about this. I'm going to make this and get reactions to it. I'm curious about how other people in my system are behaving to it because I can't have all the complete information. I might make assumptions. How do I know that other people are going to react to it? Each of us all have our own unconscious competence. How do I create the environment so that you can learn from each other's perspectives and we grow so that I can help also simulate the experiences? Again, there's that word again. It's the experience stupid. The experiences that I've had having introduced these ideas and having people react to it. We're trying to bring to market these ideas. Why are we not using years and years of people reacting to these ideas and being curious of how to help them land? We have to get a lot more curious because this is how things work. No one is in control and no one in the system has complete information.
Very robust, where the system can adapt to some large disturbance. The internet might be an example of this. Dynamically updated routing tables keep track of how long it takes to send information along any path on the network. If there is a failure in one part of the network, packets are rerouted through another channel. Control over the flow of IP packets is distributed out over many different routers and service providers with a large amount of redundancy, making it robust to failure. But equally complex adaptive systems can self-organize into a critical state where feedback loops can work to amplify some small perturbation.
Perturbation. Isn't that another word for conflict? Agitation? It's how you get clarity by actually seeing where the agitation happens, because it's going to happen. If you're going to see later in here, there's conflict designed in each of there's natural conflict in any system. For us to avoid it because it's uncomfortable isn't natural. It's better to confront it early before it becomes emotional.
To a large systemic effect as witnessed during financial crises. This emergent macro-scale system of organization, then, operates within some environment, whether we're talking about a herd of animals within an ecosystem, the human body, a democracy, or a corporation within a market. The whole macro system is periodically subject to perturbations and change within that environment. In order for it to optimize its state, there must be some mechanism for performing selection upon the agents within the system. Those creatures within an ecosystem that can best respond to the environment are replicated. Those employees that have proven their value to the company will be promoted, while others will be fired. Those products that best fulfill the demand are selected by the consumer, while others go by the wayside. The result being that the whole system evolves to exhibit more of the desired characteristics as they become more prevalent with the system. In this way, this global pattern of organization will feed back to affect the agents on the local level, both enabling them and constraining them. It enables them as it is a mechanism for them to coordinate their activities and thus receive the benefits from forming part of a complex organization in the form of security, shared knowledge, technology, and so on. But it will also constrain them, as following regulations and being subject to some form of selection is part of maintaining this global organization.
Think about this video here for a second. What I'm going to try to do is create less commentary because I want to create more of the agitation about red brain, thinking, and green brain, and how we need both. And how what's, I think, missing is we need to go way on the red brain to document what are these recurring patterns that we've got. How can we follow? My suggestion is let's follow the complex adaptive systems template. I want to do this myself. I would prioritize this. I don't have time because if I don't do that, the thinking that I need to do this is I need to separate and disengage from people. I got to be supercomputer. But right now, where we're at, with given the intensity with the COVID research, all of the webinars and engaging with people, I'm in market. I'm engaged with IQVIA. I literally don't have the ability to shift gears and stay in the green and then shift gears to the red to be able to create the kinds of assets that we need to do to build to scale the foundation of the red stuff. So I need help building the red stuff, or I need help engaging in the green stuff. Either one, I think it's just elect which one you want to do. But if we're going to do the red stuff, we must follow this video and go through and maybe take word by word. And if somebody could just go through and just take the words out, and then let's set up time with me, and let's change the words that are here. Feeds back to local level, both enabling and constraining agents. Ugh, right? Let's reword this so that it's applicable only to the value communication system. What is this box here? What is this actor here? What do these feedback loops represent? Can we repeat this? What's happening in our team? What's happening in IQVIA? How do we set this up for Polaris? How does this set up for orchestration sales? What is the role of an orchestrator? An orchestrator understands both of these things at the same time. And it's just too easy to just focus on one or the other, but you have to build this, and then you have to see how they interplay so that you make a combined one.
But of course, agents have their own agendas that may or may not be aligned with those of the whole system. And this is where the real complexity comes into the dynamic, as there is now a core tension between the micro and macro levels. The system as a whole, that is, how it appears within its environment, will be primarily defined by how this core tension is resolved. That is to say, is the system driven by the interests of the agents at the expense of the whole? Or by the interest of the whole at the expense of the interests of the individuals? Or has it managed to find some resolution to this conflict? If we take an example of an economy, we can have a free market economy which is driven primarily by the interest of the agents in a bottom-up fashion, or we might have a communist economy driven by a top-down dynamic at the expense of individual motives.
Hopefully you can see the connection with F.A. Hayek, and then also the science of all the other parts.
Or we may have some economic system that manages to integrate the two. In this module, we have tried to present an overview to complex adaptive systems. We have discussed some of their core dynamics by looking at the capacity of adaptation, how feedback loops and attractors can work to synchronize elements. We have talked about how self-organization can give rise to the emergence of distributed global patterns of organization. Lastly, we saw how through the process of evolution, this macro system of organization can feed back to affect the agents and how a new dynamic emerges between the motives of the individual agents on the micro level and this new macro level form of organization.
Oops.
Individual agents on the micro level and this.
Okay, so I want to cover off on this. Overview to complex adaptive systems. How much does that relate to how we set up the value equation or the value communication system? How can we make this simpler, more relatable? Looking at the capacity of adaptation. So what does this concept mean? How does this relate to the idea? Give me more. Me as the head of a commercial system, a sales enablement leader, an orchestrator, I want you, whoever is funding me, to give me more money. In return, I'm going to give you less stuff. As a result, I'm going to give you more. What does capacity of adaptation mean? What does it mean in terms of both a system and individual actors, or as they say, agents? Another question is an agent. How are you an agent? How are you just like a server in a network diagram? You need to be able to think about that because you are an entity, are an agent. You are also a human being. We have to be able to confront that head on. It is identical to the business problem salespeople have. We're selling to IQVIA, yet we're also selling to human beings within IQVIA. If we only focus on selling to the entity IQVIA, we get no traction. If we only focus on selling to the people within there, our opportunity is limited. How do we balance between those two things? What is your role? What is your role? You are the detangler. What does that mean versus Brian, the human being? And Brian, the human being, is interested in detangler stuff, but it's not expressed in the way that you think it is, maybe. Well, then how do we agitate out what's in your head to make it more actionable? In our brains, what's the difference between the red side and the green side? When do we actually take action versus when do we not? When do we think to death? How about the issue about nouns versus verbs? How's that related to what we're doing here? Is there even a vocabulary to action? In your observation here, how is this noun laden? And does that make you take action? How would we go about and have a verb orientation and make this more actionable? How do we create things that are actionable? How do we take action? It's not how to do something. It's the act of. The difference between planning and doing. What's the difference between the two? You do need a plan, yes, but what actually happens in action, that space, is what's being described in this view of a complex adaptive system, because agents behave on their own. What about the difference? What is self-organization and why do we want to encourage it? And I want you to ponder that before our exercise tomorrow, because that's been the idea of self-organization and emergence are things that it's interesting. We're just not patterning out. And I think I've got a thesis for why, through observation and through, experiencing this. There's a macro system and a micro system. And then there's feedback between agents. If that feedback loop isn't honest, then it breaks. That's why we want to encourage more honest interactions. And we want to motivate, the individual agents are motivated for their own self-behavior. So the more we understand the self-interest of individual agents, and we're very smart on who those individual agents are, the more opportunity for scaling success there is. And how would we match this out to people who expect a linear system? How would we organize these details? And the way that we do that is by you publishing how you're understanding this stuff. In other words, make individual planks along the way so that we can bring more people along with us. It's simple, but simple is hard. So I look
New
forward to
macro
this.
level
Hopefully this
form
is
of
good.
organization.
Oh, this is done. I hope this is good feedback and a reminder. We have these 7 principles. I'm following these 7 principles. It's the experience stupid. I shared with you my experience. What's your experience with my experience? Tap into what we learned or what I shared with you about my emotions, and or also use your tools for emotions. What is the experience? How did you experience this? Are you channeling the feedback from my frustration and internalizing it on your own? Or are you trying to say, hey, I'm going to relate with this guy and say he's been saying the same things over for 7 years? It's got to be super frustrating. How do I help him? What's the experience? How do you lead with you? How are you reacting to this stuff? If you want to help, the best way to help is to put yourself in somebody else's shoes instead of saying, here's what I would do or solution to it. It's not likely you're going to have a solution to all of this because you've not experienced it before. However, it's way more likely that you can help solve my problem by helping to say, here's how I experience it. Here's how I've documented what I've heard. And it doesn't mean everything or galactic, just a piece of it, so that I recognize that my contribution is making a plank on that ratchety rope for the elephant. It requires you to be heroic. You need some tools. Are you following the slug trail and just your own personal viewpoint? How do you click out to be holistic? You're an agent. Yes. Why are you dwelling on it? You're part of an overall system. What's the system? Now that you're experiencing it, you can be more curious about it. Engineered. What does that mean? Does that make you feel constrained or does that make you feel empowered? What do the numbers look like? Reality. What's reality really mean? It's how people behave in the moment. In the moment is what reality is. If you focus on events and situations and observe how people behave, that's reality. That's what we have to model more. We're not modeling that out. That's reality. Oh, ongoing. How do we make sure that we drive more and more action instead of, oh, I get it now, I'm done? No, I get it now is just the starting point. Then it should be, awesome. How do I get more people to do this? And then we'll worry about the INC layer. How do I trust the process? This is the process of life, guys. That's what's so empowering about a complex adaptive system is it's an observation of life, how life happens. And what are the few things that you can do to tweak so that you get the maximum effect? Get to yes quickly. We're skipping. This will happen better if we create more conflict. Get to yes quickly is an antidote to conflict. Conflict creates clarity. Be an orchestrator. If you own the fact that you have to be an orchestrator for your department or your role, then you're responsible for bringing other people along. What does architect mean to detangler? Just because you say it or make slides, does he understand? Have you given him enough information to where you can leverage him to help us manage uh, the individual? What are the words? The science words are agents, because we have to help prepare people who are in the agents to give them the tools to be able to sort. Because we're asking people to shift from one operating model to a different one. And again, remember, it's about getting it right, not being right. There's many things along the way that I've shared that could be right or wrong. That's why we led with F.A. Hayek to start off with. We need to use science to inform our decision making, but our decision making needs to be based on reality of how things work. We can simulate the reality of how things work because we're all agents in a system. These are all knowable things. How we as an individual human being, how we behave, our life force is a complex adaptive system. We respond to stimuli around us. That's what the whole idea of Here's a objective. Then what's the information around you? Because I want to be aware of what information I need to do. I don't think that we have tools to deal with the massive explosion of information that we've dealt with. And I think we need to tease that out. Then the next part would be sort of the people part. What is my role as a person? What are what are the roles of others? Am I getting what I need from others? How would I work that out? How would I escalate it? So these are the questions that we could just be asking out loud and write them down. And then when we're published as human beings, we can solve it instead of internalizing everything and making things so personal. It's completely understandable. It's just not logical. Okay, I hope this is helpful, and I hope this is good backdrop so that we create some creative conflict for tomorrow's session where we compare how would you go about doing it. Let's ask the questions through the HERO checklist. Looking forward to it. Hopefully this lands well. I'd love to get feedback on this and any ideas of what we can do to turn this into action. Take care.